Hello, my name is Aaron Munns. I'm the Veterans Director at the Mesothelioma Center at asbestos.com, a free help center for people negatively affected by asbestos exposure and asbestos diseases. I've been the Veterans Director here since 2015, so a little over 9 years at this recording. Before that, I served as an armor officer in the United States Army for over 9 years. I was a company commander with 1st Cavalry Division in OIF 2 in Baghdad. And I've assisted over 3,000 veterans in the past 9 years with asbestos-related claims. And today I'm going to try to explain how to get your VA disability claim approved if you've been affected by asbestos. Every branch of service used asbestos, and every veteran that I've come in contact with over the past 9 years has been exposed to asbestos during their service. It was used on ships, in armored vehicles, wheeled vehicles, aircraft, both rotary and fixed wing. It was used on power plants, on bases, on HVAC systems, in barracks and headquarters buildings, and in firefighting gear. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral that is resistant to heat and corrosion. It's also very cheap. As a result, it was used in thousands of different products in every branch of service. It takes a long time once you're exposed to the fibers that break down during use or friction or maintenance, and can take 10 to 45 years or more from when you're first exposed to those fibers to when you have any symptoms, health issues, or are diagnosed with an illness caused by that exposure. It was used in construction materials, in insulation, pipe lagging, brake pads, clutch faces, flex gaskets, fireproofing, fire-resistant PPE. Navy non-skid paint had asbestos in it to make it stronger and more resistant to corrosion. It was used in engine wraps on vehicles, on heat proofing, and in ammunition storage. As you can see, it was used in a variety of different applications in every branch of service. So assuming that you're a veteran and you've been exposed to asbestos, how do you file a successful VA disability claim for that exposure? Well, the first thing to know is that exposure to asbestos does not qualify you for as having a disability or an injury. You have to have a diagnosis of a condition that the VA recognizes may be caused by asbestos. And this requires a nexus statement from a medical specialist, a letter from your doctor stating that asbestos is the cause of that diagnosis. The next thing to know is that nothing is presumptive for non-PACT Act asbestos claims. You must prove the medical connection and military exposure to asbestos. So if you qualify for a PACT Act claim for a deployment to the Persian Gulf or post 9/11 asbestos exposure from burn pits overseas, you won't file an asbestos-related claim. You'll file a presumptive claim under the PACT Act for burn pit and airborne hazards. But if you don't have one of those qualifying deployments in the last 35 years, you're going to need to start your claim with a valid diagnosis and by proving that a majority of your lifetime exposure to asbestos occurred on active duty. The conditions that the VA recognized can be caused by asbestos are primarily lung conditions. Asbestos fibers can enter your body two ways: by inhaling the fibers, the airborne fibers, into your lungs, or by swallowing those fibers and they can get into your digestive system and urinary tract. The most common conditions caused by asbestos exposure are scarring in the lungs. This can be interstitial pulmonary fibrosis or asbestosis. It can be pleural fibrosis or pleural plaques, which can then cause pleural effusion or fluid buildup in the pleural space between the lungs and the rib cage. They can also cause rare cancers like mesothelioma of the pleura or peritoneum, the lining around the lungs and the lining around the abdominal organs. The VA also recognizes that asbestos can cause cancer of the lung, bronchus, gastrointestinal tract, larynx, pharynx, and urogenital system, except the prostate. So how do you get the correct diagnosis and nexus statement from your doctor? The first step is to be your own self-advocate. Talk to your doctor about your service and your asbestos exposure. Most doctors are only concerned with identifying the diagnosis and then treating your symptoms or trying to cure you. They don't necessarily focus on what may have been the root cause of your condition. For asbestos lung disease, you want to get a CT scan with contrast. That's the gold standard to get a diagnosis of an asbestos lung disease. The CT scan shows the most definition and detail and gives your doctor the most information to make an accurate diagnosis. You also need a pulmonary function test with spirometry, a PFT, which measures your lung capacity. If your VA disability claim is approved, the VA will rate your disability percentage based on how much lung function you've lost as a result of that diagnosis as measured by the PFT. You want to see a pulmonary lung specialist, a pulmonologist, because they are best trained to diagnose a restrictive lung disease or interstitial lung disease caused by asbestos, and they can differentiate more common lung diseases like COPD or emphysema from an asbestos lung disease. If you have a cancer that may be caused by asbestos, it's going to require a tissue biopsy and pathology report stating the cell type of that cancer, and you also need that nexus letter written by your oncologist stating that asbestos is a contributing cause of the cancer. It doesn't have to be the only risk factor, but the oncologist needs to make the case that your cancer is at least in part caused by exposure to asbestos. For cancers other than mesothelioma, the presence of an asbestos lung disease in addition to that cancer helps the oncologist make that connection. Once you talk to your doctor and you have the diagnosis and you've explained how and when you were exposed to asbestos during your service, you need them to put that connection in writing in the form of a nexus statement or a letter in which they state that in their professional opinion, your diagnosis was likely caused by exposure to asbestos, or asbestos is one of the contributing causes of your diagnosis. Now, they don't have to say that they are 100% positive or that asbestos was the only cause. What the burden of proof is for them to say that asbestos is at least as likely as not to have been a contributing factor in your diagnosis. And that equates to there's a 50% chance or greater that asbestos contributed. In this letter, we also want them to reference why they came to this conclusion by providing a rationale, referring to CT scans, pathology reports, or the presence of an existing asbestos-related illness that you've been dealing with prior to the new diagnosis of a cancer. We'd also like them to state that your diagnosis is consistent with the latency period of asbestos exposure during your service. This can help make the connection stronger between your service exposure and your condition versus any civilian exposure that you may have had. Once you have the nexus statement, the final step in submitting your claim is preparing an asbestos exposure summary. This is a personal statement in support of your claim, which describes how and when and where you were exposed to asbestos during your service, and a brief description of any civilian exposure you had, with the conclusion that you had more lifetime exposure on active duty than you did before or after your service. What's important to remember here is not to assume that the VA knows anything about how and when you were exposed to asbestos based on your branch of service or your MOS. If you do this, you run the risk that the VA may acknowledge your exposure or may acknowledge very minimal exposure and deny your claim because they assume that you may have had more exposure as a civilian. In conclusion, if you are a veteran and you're dealing with an asbestos-related illness and trying to qualify for benefits from the VA, or you've had exposure and you want to know how to get proper testing and what to talk to your doctor about, you can contact me at aaron@asbestos.com. You can go on our website, asbestos.com, and fill out a request for some information, or you can call me at 888-327-8271. I provide information for veterans and veteran service officers. I can provide assistance with evidence to support your claim. I can help you connect with an attorney for a civilian claim if you've been diagnosed with lung cancer or mesothelioma cancer. And if you're a VSO and you want to schedule a state training for your next annual training school, please reach out and I'll try to find out how I may be able to help. Thank you.